everybody, welcome back to my podcast and YouTube platform, Tell Me Something New. I am doing something a little bit different today, and I am actually going to talk a little bit about the first 6 podcasts. I've already done about 12, which is really great. It's coming along, it's a fun creative process, and there is so much information that I've been learning through these interviews with people that I figured it needed to be given an opportunity for pause to sort of reflect on what we've been learning together, and do a little bit of integration work and try to take meaning from what these different guests are sharing with me on this podcast, because all of my guests are so very different in how they relate to their own creative ideas. And also do a little check-in, I guess, and reflection on how the podcast is changing and morphing, because it seems to be doing that all by itself. So anyways, if you're interested in being on the podcast, I'll just put a quick shout out. You can reach out to me at NewThoughtExperimentOwner@gmail.com. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have a creative idea, project, artwork, anything you want to share. Everybody is welcome to share their ideas. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to, I guess, just kind of start talking about what I've learned so far on the podcast. First thing I've learned so far is that my audio quality sucks. After I listened back on the podcast, I realized how difficult at times it was to hear people, and so thank you for all of you who actually listen, because I can see that people are listening. Thank you for listening despite that horrible audio quality. I'm going to try to work on that and see if there's a way to make it a little bit clearer, and that's okay, all in due process. This is a very realistic podcast, and I'm not trying to make it perfect, but I do want you to be able to hear it. So that's one thing that I have learned. But more than that, when I listened back on my first podcast, which I was talking about the idea, hey, tell me a new idea, I really was focused on, I guess, creativity from a cognitive or mental domain, about just like a new idea. And the people I've been having on my podcast are showing me just how creative they are in so many different ways of their life. I think I tend to be a very intellectual person, and I tend to intellectualize a lot and express creativity through thoughts. But as you can tell, if you've been listening, the people I'm interviewing, they relate to creativity through their bodies, through their music, through their approach to language. So many different things. And I think that is amazing. And yeah, it's taking a shape of its own. I think the biggest thing so far that I've noticed is that creative practices show up everywhere, and they look different for everybody. And I am really excited about exploring that and sharing that with people. So in our first podcast, it was just me sort of introducing the podcast and the creative idea. And then we moved on and we talked to Rubaba, who is a musician, a classically trained musician. And he talked about his concept, agitation before meditation, and sort of reframed what agitation meant, and how allowing for agitation and internal noise, movement, tension allows us to create a space for catharsis, which can allow us to arrive into stillness. So he talked to us about that, and we had a very interesting conversation. And him, among other people I've been talking to, sort of brought up this idea of, perhaps it's not that we're creating anything truly new, we're just accessing ancient wisdom or ancient ideas, which, believe it or not, is actually a very common thought that a lot of people have. It's not a thought that I necessarily shared initially, but I'm seeing more and more that the people I reach out to at times feel that they are more so receiving information that perhaps already existed, which is actually really fascinating, because a lot of people have that viewpoint, it seems. And so then we moved on and we did another podcast, and I believe I spoke with Zach. Let me see, who do I spoke with next? We spoke with, I think it was Zach. Oops, let's see. Oh no, it was me. I talked about gratitude as an emotional thermometer. So it was me again. And this podcast was, again, I think very intellectual, in the sense that I was coming up with an idea to share, not necessarily a creative practice. But I think what I noticed most about that podcast is that idea came out of an unexpected turn of events. I remember that day I had planned to talk to another guest, and there was a technical issue. And I decided, you know what, the show must go on. I just need to post something, which is kind of what's happening today, because I kind of am tired today and didn't want to post anything. But I was like, you know what, I just need to make space for the creative process to continue. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I think a big takeaway from that podcast that I recorded was sort of the importance of just showing up for creativity. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be well executed. It just needs to be, and the idea needs to get out. And so then we moved on to Zach, who is a soundscape artist, and he talked to us about his work creating soundscapes, oftentimes incorporating nature sounds, and how for him, his creative process comes to him through deep listening, and how he actually needs less stimulation from outer circumstances to allow creativity to flow through him and come out, which is a little bit counterintuitive, because oftentimes, especially with creativity, you might think more is more, but I think in his case it was more about less is more, which was kind of fascinating. So we had that really interesting conversation, and then we talked to Robert, who talked about acrogems, which was, I think, so far one of my favorite conversations. So interesting. And acrogems, what is an acrogem? An acrogem is fear, false evidence appearing real, truth, things remaining, I can't even remember what it stands for, truth, things remaining, I can't remember. Anyways, love, lasting, obvious, various events, stranger, somebody that really reveals new good relationship energy. Anyways, that's the idea. Acrogems are when you take the first letter of a word, of each letter in a word, and you create phrases that mean something. And so Robert was sort of looking at words from a different vantage point and adding additional meaning or nuance to them, which was really cool. And from that, he had derived some parts of his personal philosophy, which was really awesome. I think one of my favorite was argue. What was it? Why am I forgetting? Of course I'm forgetting because I'm on the spot. But angry, recurring grumbling unravels everything, I think was argue. Angry, recurring grumbling unravels everything. Isn't that true? Angry, recurring grumbling unravels everything. So we had that very interesting conversation about acrogems. And that was an idea that Robert came up on his own. And, interestingly enough, I've run into other folks who have actually kind of created that same idea, completely independent of Robert, which is really fascinating, all with their different flavors and perspectives on it. So that was wonderful. And then we talked to, I believe it was Mary Jane was next. Let's see. Was it Mary Jane? It was Mary Jane, my friend Mary Jane, who created a new salon model. And her kind of talent is finding creativity in other people and bringing it all together under her one shop and providing an amazing service to people so they can get a one-stop shop for whatever they need. So kind of creating multiple service lines within her business and figuring out a way to create a leadership and business environment where people really feel like family and enjoy being artists together, which was so cool. And so I have really enjoyed interviewing folks. I'm going to pause there because I could go on with another 6 episodes that I recorded, but there's so much information that I think it needs to be every 5 or 6 episodes. Anyways, one of the common things that I've noticed is kind of coming up throughout the interview, and I wrote it down because otherwise I'm going to forget, is this idea that creativity is not necessarily coming up with something completely novel. It's more about how we form relationships between things we already recognize. An example of this is, perhaps Mary Jane's idea is not 100% novel, but she managed to take, a bunch of unrealized talent and put it together in a new way. She recombined things in a new way. Same thing with Robert. He's recombining new information in a new way. Something that already is there, he's just seeing new connections or new perspectives. With Rababa, if you listen back on that episode, what he told us was, I've been trained in this, I've been trained in this music, I've been trained in this meditation, I've been practicing this spirituality, I come from this culture, and in combining everything, I have come up with my very unique. healing practice that I do for people. And so what I wrote, it's not necessarily about producing something from nothing. It's about discovering the relationship between things that seemingly before were separate. So can we discover relationships between things that before seemed separate? I think that is one of the most interesting creative, I guess, realizations that I'm having through interviewing all these interesting people. You don't have to come up with something brand new. It could have been someone else could have come up with it easily, 500 other times. But it's really about a person's ability, it seems, at least at this point, and I could be wrong, but to kind of recognize relationships and see relationships between different things. It could be words, it could be people, it could be talents, it could be music and sounds, ideas, and then elicit them, kind of reconnect or recombine them, and then also find a way to convey and share that with other people. Rababa shares his healing music with people through his Nod Yoga. Mary shares her wonderful talents through people, through a literal business, in California. Robert shares his, wisdom and insight through words that are very powerful and memorable. I still, obviously I couldn't remember all of the acronyms he shared because, my brain isn't perfect, but highly memorable information. It's very interesting. So I think that's also part of the creative process too, is not always, but maybe finding ways to take your creative recombinations and package them into a way that other humans relate to and get excited about, and that's in a sense kind of what I'm doing with this podcast right now, integrating everything. I've seen all these patterns between all the podcasts that I've done, and I'm saying, wow, how interesting is this? What types of relationships am I seeing that maybe I didn't when I looked at everything individually, but then when I look at everything as a whole after re-listening to all the podcasts, at least the ones that I could actually hear because my audio wasn't good, I can all of a sudden see new insight and wisdom emerging, and I'm sharing that hopefully in a way that you can at least hear. So that was really interesting. The other thing that I think was really interesting is I think part of the creative process is also being willing to tolerate uncertainty. You don't have to know how something's going to turn out. Personal example, took me a while to get this podcast up and running because I was wondering, well, what if it turns out crummy, or what if it's not well received, or what if, I don't have a direction. It doesn't matter. You just do it, and it starts to take on a life of its own. And so I think part of being willing to create is being willing to sit with not knowing exactly how your creative process is going to turn out. And that's really important. I really think that that's very important because a lot of artists and creators get a little bit stuck when they don't have their creative vision completely aligned, or I don't know, they don't have the full picture yet of how exactly it's going to turn out. But that's not really how a lot of the people I'm interviewing approach things, including myself with this interview. I mean, Mary kind of built her salon from the ground up and added, and then it's just all of a sudden become this cool developmental ecosystem where people are leading, learning, sharing their unique talents. Same thing with Rababa. He's been learning these, creative, musically inclined talents for many, many years, and throughout time has sort of created his own brand and understanding of how to share that with people that's very unique, that I don't think anyone else has been able to do. It's the same thing with Zach, and it's the same thing with Robert, and I think that's very fascinating. Maybe we don't have to have it all figured out. Maybe we just need to be okay with not knowing exactly where our creativity is going to go and just let it be a process. So I think that is so cool. Another really big thing that I noticed was a lot of the creative process seems to be about perspective shifting. And so, for example, for Mary, a salon is not just a workplace. It is a developmental and leadership ecosystem. For Robert, words are not just communication. They're creative objects. They're diamonds. They're wisdom units that he conveys to other people. For Rababa, agitation is not just an obstacle to inner healing. It's actually a pathway for meditation connected through catharsis and releasing. So a lot of this creativity is coming from an ability of people to shift their perspective, see the same exact thing, quote unquote, from different perspectives, through a different lens, oftentimes informed by their life experiences and their values. And that's really, really cool too. So that's something that I thought was really interesting. Creativity is socially transmissible. The more we talk about it, the more we learn. This podcast is making me a lot more creative. I've noticed that I am writing more, reading more, doing more creative things. For some reason, I've all of a sudden got interested in martial arts, which is one of the upcoming podcasts, actually, no, I already posted that podcast, but not talking about it today, but it's just so interesting how that works, and I think there's a lot of value in sharing our creative ideas because it inspires other people, it inspires other people to do the same. So I've had a really good time learning from everybody who's coming onto this podcast. Thank you for all of you who have come on so far. It's been really, really cool. And thank you for all of you who are yet to be on my podcast, because I know there's a lot of you folks out there who are very interested, and we just haven't set a date to record yet. So that's exciting. There's also some folks where we have recorded. I just haven't been able to get it out yet because life. So I'm going to leave you with a few questions. These are just some things that I've been pondering. Number one, what if the obstacles I face in my life have a secondary creative purpose? I think that is an interesting idea to sit with. A lot of the creativity I've seen people discuss on my podcast so far comes from a place of tension. There's something that is seemingly an obstacle or could be perceived as a setback, and yet it leads to a flourishing of a person's mind and creative process. Another question I would like to leave you with is, what if I'm just okay with not knowing how my creative process unfolds? What if I'm just okay with it? I think that would actually help us all be a little bit more creative at the end of the day. And ultimately, I think creative process is just another way to say life. Our life is our biggest creative work that we have, and we have the ability to create really, really wonderful things. And just as I said right at the beginning of this podcast when I first started, we also have the ability to create really, really negative things, really, really scary things, or really beautiful things. And so what if we're just okay with not knowing exactly how that creative process is going to come out, but we stay willing and open to take new perspectives, and we stay willing and open to be humble to the creative process itself, And also, once we create something, can we simply, once we're done with it, just kind of let it go and allow other people to receive it as they will with their own minds, and let it be what it is, and not worry about how other people might interpret it. That I think is something that has come as an insight from all this work we've been doing together and co-creating on the podcast. So anyways, those are some of my new ideas about what I'm learning from all of you, and I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening. I'm really hoping that, these integration podcasts can maybe give us some time and space to think at a little bit of a higher level about what the similarities and differences are between creative minds. And I would really be interested to hear from people that don't agree. I'd be really interested to hear from people who perhaps don't feel that they're creative. I'd be interested to hear from people who maybe don't resonate with what I'm saying, or don't resonate with what some of the other creatives are coming up with, because there's so many different ways to be in this world. And as Robert's mom said, there's no personality vacancies in the universe, and that makes me think that there's no creativity vacancies in the universe either. And so it's all good here. It's all good to share. So anyways, thank you for taking time to listen to this. This is Tell Me Something New podcast, and if you're interested in being featured as a guest, all you have to do is reach out to NewThoughtExperimentOwner@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to have you come on and tell me about your new creative ideas. And I really hope you have a great one. Take good care. Bye-bye.